Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Logan, student staffer here at the Hinckley Institute. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse through civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled Indigenous Storytelling and Preservation of Oral History. We want to thank Utah Presents for their leadership on this event, and we are excited to have the Indigenous Performance Production team on our campus. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Andre Bouchard. Andre Bouchard is of the Kootenai, Ojibwe, Pondere/Flathead Salish descent. He is an activist, agent, director, and producer and consultant who was born and raised on the Flathead Reservation in western Montana. Andre aspires to serve as an intercultural activist, working to build bridges and reverse the invisibility that serves to marginalize Native people in the U.S. Andre's primary background is as a producer of dance, theater, music, and multidisciplinary performance. But he has worked into practically every role in the performing arts since he began to self-produce in 1999. In 2001, he founded Walrus Performance Productions, a nonprofit dedicated to providing first opportunities to choreographers, playwrights, and multidisciplinary performing artists in the Pacific Northwest. In 2010, he founded Walrus Arts Management and Consulting, which was expanded in 2015 to serve as a home to the first Native-run performing arts booking agency. In 2019, he founded Indigenous Performance Productions, a nonprofit corporation migrating all operations from Walrus Acts Management, a by/for Indigenous artists service organization and production house dedicated to producing new works, booking, and managing tours, providing professional development, and educating the performing arts fields about Indigenous culture and performing arts and content. After our speech from Andre, we'll have a moderated discussion with him and Kayloa, a writing and rhetoric PhD student here at the University of Utah. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to come and talk to y'all. It's always sort of a privilege to come and share my thoughts with people who are, thinking for a living and that sort of thing. It's truly a privilege to be in school, and I loved it so much that I've gone back so many times. I think I've been, after 2 undergraduate degrees, a master's degree, and 3 postgraduate fellowships, it's been like 11 years. But my wife is an enabler, so it's all good. Waislexit, hello. I want to start by reading the prelude to a play that I've been producing for the last 8 years on tour called And So We Walked by Delana Studi. Gather round. You're about to hear a story, but not just any story. There are stories that really happened. There are stories that we tell ourselves to get through the day. Stories we know to be true, somewhere deep in our bones. This is a story of those, jumbled into one. Think of the stories we were told as children. So many have curses to overcome, don't they? Fairy tales where the princess falls under a terrible curse, only to be rescued by a handsome prince who slays a monster. Bible stories where Eve was cursed for eating the forbidden fruit. Even my people, the Cherokee, have stories like Spearfinger, a shape-shifting woman cursed by insatiable hunger. Every great story has truth in it, and the truth demands to be told. And a true story can be dangerous. Because even if you're the best storyteller, you can't outrun the truth. Truth will find you. Growing up, there was a dichotomy between the stories I read in books, and I read a lot of books, and the stories that I heard from my elders and the folk on the res. There were so many differences. I came to hold the belief in my youth that our stories were not allowed, the stories from my people. Yes, there was a prohibition, there was a taboo against telling stories outside of the season between the first flakes of snowfall in the winter and the first thunder of spring. And there were more stories told about those people who indiscreetly violated that tradition, bad things. There were so many differences, either by the will of the people or the will of Hollywood, who is the gatekeeper for many stories, or the publishing industry, who is also a gatekeeper for stories, and so on, out into the world. In my youth, when I made reference to the stories I heard in the winter months, stories of my people's creation, coyote stories, stories of the animal people that came before us, that came before people in human shape, came to the earth. My white teachers frequently corrected me or dismissed my love for this part of my life. Later in life, I came to understand the truth, that there just wasn't the context. The narrative that had been told about Native people in this country for 2 centuries was not written by us without our cultural lens, and for the most part, has very little to do with the multitude of nations and cultures that have called this land home since time immemorial. But time passes. Things change. It was 1998. I was a senior in college. Well, here's an admission, the first of 3 senior years. I stayed on for a second undergraduate degree, much to my mother's chagrin. I love learning. In 1998, on a summer day between the shifts at the restaurant I was working with for college to pay the bills, I went to the Crystal Theater, a tiny 50-seat indie venue. I saw a movie that had been made from a story by Sherman Alexie, his book Tonto and the Lone Ranger Fistfight in Heaven. This was the day that my eyes opened. Until that time, it had never occurred to me that content by and for Native people was even possible. There has been a slow awakening over the last 30 years, standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, our mothers and fathers, aunties and uncles, who have sacrificed to make a better world for future generations, make a better world where our stories would be welcome. There is now a groundswell of emerging Native storytellers, because stories are important. In the past, we've told stories through the art we created, dance, music, oral tradition, the garments we wear. It evolved as trade networks shifted. Indigenous people from across the globe share this story. We adapt and adapt and adapt because the world changes. There is a widespread and mistaken notion that the only authentic Indigenous culture is frozen in some nebulous point in the past. This serves no one well. As culture collided in the cataclysm of colonization, pardon the alliteration, We told stories to give hope, stories that contain the vital information to survive. My elders told me a story about plants that you took to help with tuberculosis, measles, women's issues, aches and pains, even smallpox, because they had to struggle with those diseases. My mother is a survivor of polio. Today, we tell stories to stay connected in the real world, to hold each other accountable, to keep the memories of our ancestors alive, to stand fast against the challenges that collide with us from technology, social ills, and the systems that were designed to plan for our extinction. Storytelling is an act of becoming. There are many Indigenous storytellers becoming who they need to be right now, as we all are. I want to tell a story about my mom because I told a story about my dad last night, and it only seems right. My mother's favorite food when I was growing up was open-faced cheese and tomato sandwiches. She would take white bread and toast it, and then put on some slices of, we got bricks of government cheese on the res, slide it into the oven, toast it for a while, took time, made it nice and bubbly. Then she would take a slice of usually cold, unripe tomato, hard as a tennis ball, and just put it on top. I would complain sometimes about this meal because she served it so often. But I would eat 3, 4, 5 slices frequently. The burnt toast, the warm, bubbly cheese contrasting with the acidic tomato, actually really good. My daughter loves this meal now. I never realized what I had until I visited my friend Mike's house. Mike rarely had adults around. He lived with his grandparents who both worked. He made cheese sandwiches for me one day. Same white bread, same government cheese, no tomatoes. It wasn't until I visited Mike's house and he made me that sandwich that I realized what I had, what a slice of unripe tomato could mean. My friend Wendy Redstar once told me that every Native artist, whatever their discipline, is compelled to make 3 works in their lifetime. One about blood quantum, a system that was originated to sort of plan for our extinction. Because with every generation, if we marry outside of even our tribe, we risk becoming disenrolled. And blood quantum is a complex system. And I can give you reading resources if you want to learn about that. There's a couple of really good books on it. One about food. We have to make a story about food because if you've ever been into a Native gathering, you will be fed. And the last one about their dad. Wendy used to tell me that no one was exempt, that the Creator would stay our execution, keep our heart beating until we finish the last piece. The last night in the story circle at the Indian Center, I told a story about my dad. But that story is still being written, even now as he is an ancestor, because I'm a dad now, and I'm writing a story that I want to tell my children. I see the hopes that my dad had for me in the love that I have for my children. Today, I'm extremely privileged to have a job that allows me to support from the sidelines this groundswell of Indigenous artists, that allows me sort of a window seat on this emergence of story from communities across the many Native nations. There are 574 federally recognized tribes and over 100 that are recognized on a statewide basis. The big surprise from the last census, the 2020 census, from the 2010 census, is the way they asked the question of identity around Native American people, American Indian, as it's termed in the census, changed the number of people self-identifying as American Indian, Native American, from 2.5 million to around 10 million people. These are important things to think about because identity is a multifaceted question. And the identity of Native people is intrinsically intertwined with the identity that we have as Americans. As a producer, I search for what I call elegant vehicles for stories, getting stories out into the universe. Ways to tell stories that both serve Indigenous communities, but also simultaneously educate interculturally. Communities serve to educate about who we are, and I can't speak for everyone. I'm not really even an expert on my tribe. I feel uncomfortable when someone calls me a culture bearer or an uncle. Again, active becoming. My elders have told me that I should smile and thank them when they call me uncle. Educate folk about what we value, our challenges, and our reasons for celebration. As someone with one of my degrees in cultural anthropology, I adamantly insist that culture is one of the most important lenses that you can have to look at the world. Culture teaches us how to raise our children, how to treat our elders, how to be in community, when to rise, how hard to work. The father of modern management science, was it Paul Dietrich? I can't remember his name. Famously said once, culture eats business plans for breakfast. Oh, I love that quote. Anyways. So elegant vehicles. Horror, for one, is an elegant vehicle. It's an ever-faceted genre. You have camp, which is comedic horror, supernatural horror, thrillers, slashers, dystopian stories, post-apocalyptic science fiction, monsters, psychological, and on and on. You can pack so many stories, so many relevant topics into the vehicle of horror. You can talk about domestic violence. You can talk about substance abuse, destruction of land, breakdown of cultural values, breakdown of families. And you don't have to write a description saying you're talking about that in the description of the play or the movie, because people expect it, but they're learning. So I get people into theaters, mostly. I also sometimes make film through elegant vehicles. No, I'm going the other way in my notes. Music can similarly be used as a vehicle for deeper meaning. Listen to the lyrics. And of course, comedy. Comedy is the OG vehicle. I want to read you an essay from a friend of mine, Tiffany Midge, that my organization commissioned. Tiffany is a Lakota satirist. She wrote Bury My Heart at Chuck E. Cheese. And she's just a lovely human being. It's titled The Indigenous Whoopee Cushion School of Comedy. Since time immemorial, my Indigenous ancestors have practiced the sacred art of comedy. Comedy gold classics such as Whoopee Cushions predate first contact. The choke cherry cream pies in the face are actually Paleolithic. Cave wall paintings provide the earliest clues for this existence of ancient Native American shtick. Whoopee cushions, sometimes called toot pillows, were originally made from bladders of deer and bison. The bladder was inflated, tied off, much like a modern-day balloon. Prehistoric examples of whoopee cushions, along with the shards of ancient pie pans, were discovered in archaeological digs near the famous Corn Palace in Mitchell, South Dakota. Evidence of coup sticks that have been excavated, providing that slapstick, quite literally slapstick, was highly regarded as a cultural custom. Since time immemorial, my indigenous ancestors have practiced the sacred art of comedy. It's not widely known that the legendary Hunkpapa leader, Sitting Bull, was a notorious practical joker. He often pranked Red Cloud during tribal council by placing a whoopee cushion beneath Red Cloud, his buffalo robe that he sat on, with hilarious results. But he stole all the best material from the band Heyoka, Pretty Wallowing Woman, and passed it off as his own. In fact, it was Ernest Iron Necklace, a great-great-grandson of Pretty Wallowing Woman, who originated the Take My Wife, Please shtick that was made famous by the comedian Henny Youngman. In 1967 Newsweek article, the famous king of one-liners credits Iron Necklace as being an inspiration for his comedy. Iron Necklace, I'm sorry. Iron Necklace was my comedy spirit patroness, Youngman said. Youngman was ahead of his time regarding the use of patroness rather than spirit animal. Thank you for bearing with me. Obviously, I'm just clowning with the above statements, except the opening line. Since time immemorial, my indigenous ancestors have practiced the sacred art of comedy. That is believable. In whatever forms or directions my ancestors' humor may have taken, there have been many ideas and well-established conclusions about Native humor over the decades. A starting point beginning with the author, activist, and historian Vine Delora Jr., Standing Rock Sioux, his seminal essay, Indian Humor, from his book, Custer Died for Your Sins, detailed specific jokes from Indian jokes canon, as it were, and have been cited repeatedly in textbooks and Native studies scholarship for decades. After so many years, one might wonder if this essay holds up. Is his essay still relevant in 2025? It would seem so. Particularly the Custer jokes he cites. Natives still enjoy a good Custer zinger, evidenced by how many memes and cartoons I see running across the social media feeds, especially around June 25th, known as Greasy Grass or the Battle of Little Bighorn. In fact, jokes and memes, Native satire, from Indian country is more accessible and widely enjoyed than ever. Content which would make church lady clutch their pears. And I would imagine Deloria would laugh out loud. Indians seem highly appreciative of inappropriate humor, enjoy being shocked and revel in pushing the envelopes. But if one looks at the creation stories and folklore of tribal peoples, the stories are full of sexual mishaps, risque characters, and all varieties of ribald humor. There are stories about tricksters lusting after various targets, young women seducing star people, and even more salacious fare. In the aftermath of the Greasy Grass, Little Bighorn battlefield, was the humor, poetic justice, or both, that prompted Cheyenne women to take up sewing needles and pierce the eardrums of the defeated General Custer? The testimony being so that he might hear better in the afterlife, certainly better than when he was alive. And this was a similar concept used following the Sioux Uprising. The Dakota had been denied food or extended credit by the white traders and were prohibited to hunt outside the reservation boundaries. The people were starving, and a trader, Andrew Myrick, said they should eat grass. Myrick was slain during the uprising, and when his body was found, his mouth had been stuffed with grass. The Crow artist Wendy Redstar refers to the story about Medicine Crow to describe Indian humor, or more specific, absolute humor. I'm not the only, Many people struggle with these pronunciations. Red Star recounts the Medicine Crow possessed a weird and wicked sense of humor. When Medicine Crow and others killed some horse thieves, he cut off their hands, later used the horse thief's severed hands to shake hands with the reservation's Indian agent. Red Star said, the fact that this one guy had this bizarre sense of humor, well, I want people to know that. Indeed. So when I run across TikTok videos that are rugged or cringe, while at the same time being hysterically funny, I remember that Indians have been practitioners of this brand of humor, gallows humor, but in a good way, for a long time, since time immemorial, indeed. One example of this dark but scathing humor occurred during Standing Rock. Natives were posting memes and jokes on social media that responded to water protectors on the front lines being attacked viciously by dogs. Memes and jokes which were posted less than 24 hours after actually having been attacked by vicious dogs. I don't know if this type of schadenfreude, deriving amusement or pleasure from witnessing others' misfortune, or if this follows in the category of transcending trauma through humor, another hallmark of Native culture. A more subtle perspective of Native humor used during Standing Rock, and perhaps more uplifting version that suggests using humor to count coup on oppressors. When was Kanupa Haska Luger used the Mirror Shield project to reflect back upon the riot police on the front lines. Parodies sometimes hold up a mirror against adversaries through nonviolent resistance. It is gentler, but all the more devastating in spite of itself. All too often, the media and publishing industry complex seems very invested in our tragedy and the redemption narrative, a kind of poverty tourism for public consumption. Of course, it's fair to say that Western literature has always been about death and tragedy. Native American literature fits right in. Books, photojournalism, films, all about intergenerational trauma. About the plight of Native Americans, our struggles, oppression, disappearance, and genocide. I wonder about the opposite end of the spectrum, intergenerational joy, intergenerational creativity, intergenerational humor, intergenerational weirdness. Can I even claim being Native if I don't have a personal trauma narrative replete with a strong message of hope and redemption? This concept of Indian humor or indigenous joy represents in art, especially as a binary or even an antidote to indigenous trauma or poverty tourism. For consumption or exploitation rings hollow in perspective to me. It is helpful to consider humor and joy as being fundamental values, encompassing the human experience while also considered there are definitive features, content, and attitudes characterize so-called native humor. Native humor is a very comprehensive issue, and I wonder about delabeling it, perhaps inviting the idea that Indians are human, a bold thought. Can we conceive of humor as human? Does native humor require the label? Never mind. Smashes huckleberry cream pie in face. This is Tiffany's 2 cents. When she wrote this article on Wendy Red Star's work for The New Yorker, during an editing phase, she was asked to elaborate on the concept of Indian humor, particularly because Red Star was an astute satirist. And let me tell you, she was thrilled to offer her 2 cents, especially as a prominent magazine writer. Rarely are natives asked to contribute to such conversations, let alone discuss something as niche or unusual as native humor, although that's certainly changing. While Indian humor may contrast from mainstream American humor in a lot of ways, perhaps its most prevalent characteristics is how often it solicits explanation and how self-referential it is, to the point where whenever a native makes a joke, those who are listening respond by appreciatively acknowledge their use of Indian humor. After centuries of being mischaracterized as stoic and austere, it is plausible, even necessary, to self-reference our use of humor as a means to reassert our humanity. And of course, this is in itself an example of Indian humor. Without shared context or insider knowledge of history or lived experience, certain ironies or certain gallows brand humor, another telltale signature, can't be fully appreciated beyond the surface. With the emergence of Indigenous comedians and show writers in the small screen on television, characterized by Reservation Dogs, Rutherford Falls, and some thriller horrors out there, Night Country, True Detective, Dark Winds, and so on. With this platform within Hollywood entertainment and television, shows like Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls are finally offering perspective, not often viewed on the national stage. And as new and exciting as this is, and as much of a revelation as it might seem to older generations, Indigenous humor is nothing new. It's just expanding in reach. It's just emerging. And while the development certainly has its benefit, optimizing awareness, visibility, obviously, it also sends a strong message that we are still here, that we are human, that we've always been here, that we've always had a sense of humor, that we laugh with our grandmas and grandpas, aunties, uncles, cousins around the kitchen table, that we meet at powwows, and these are joyful events, that we meet at graduation ceremonies, and yes, funerals. There is lots of laughter at funerals. We've always found a circle to join in where we joke, tease, and stretch the truth and entertain. We use humor to keep each other in check, to keep each other accountable. I'm left to wonder why it's taken America so long to figure out that it's worth production value, worth the trouble of investing into, to create content for television. Moreover, shift the whole paradigm from the dominant narrative to a culturally specific one. The shift is dramatic. And in that development, Indigenous creators are being directly compensated also, which is a welcome change. There's no denying that we participate in capitalism as much as the rest of the world, and our financial gains are important in counteracting decades of poverty. Its benefit to our young people is to see themselves on stage, in media, in books, not as stereotypes or mockeries, but as fully developed characters, as human. Vine Deloria wrote in his essay, Indian Humor, one of the best ways to understand a people is to know how to make them laugh. Laughter encompasses the limits of the soul. In humor, life is redefined and accepted. Irony and satire provide a much keener insight into a group's collective psyche and values than do years of research. Right now, with this emerging group of storytellers, we have a growing network of support. Organizations such as my own and colleagues of mine who are working assiduously to find opportunity and sustainability in the systems that we have and to evolve the systems to be welcome of ours. It's a good time to be Indigenous. And that's another quote from Smoke Signals. That's the first line in that. It was spoken from the airwaves of a little radio station on the Nez Perce Reservation in that story. Although to tell our traditional stories, we need permission, sometimes we tell them. But even though a story that you hear from an Indigenous person isn't traditional, doesn't make it part of our oral tradition. Most of the stories I heard growing up around the table were not traditional. This is how we keep in practice on the off season, as it were. Again, it is a hopeful time. I see mid-career artists out there like Emily Johnson, who does dance work, who is Yupik, and does multi-day residencies where a community spends nights together gazing at the stars and talking and sharing stories together. To Larissa Fast Horse, who her play, The Thanksgiving Play, which is deeply flawed in my opinion, was the most performed play in America in, I think, 2023. She parked like every shitty thing about us in that play. I love Larissa. We sometimes butt heads, but she's brilliant. Rihanna Yazzie up at New Native Theater. Emerging outfits like Natives of the Apocalypse, who are doing an all native version of The Odd Couple down in Santa Fe. Every time I turn around, there's new emerging Native folk offering their content for the world. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the 1491s, who amusingly, I had a stand-up comedy tour that I was supporting, and a very well-intentioned audience goer wrote me a very long and outraged letter saying that, boy, it was just way too dirty, the comedy that she heard, and why couldn't we just have, something, like the 1491s, Between Two Knees, which, if you think about that, the whole play is basically a dick joke. And I wrote her a kind response saying, it's completely authentic, and I tremendously respect your opinion, and I invite you to evolve your viewpoints. So I'm sort of wrapping up here, and I'm going to get to Kayla's questions here in a little bit. But I wanted to give a little shout out to the show that my outfit is producing, The Aunties. It's a series, live storytelling and documentary. My camera crew has been in town, and after we're in Salt Lake City, we'll be up in Logan at Utah State University doing it again. But this series is meant as a cultural resource for our communities. And we're publishing a series of these documentary shorts with 3 storytellers per site. And this is our 6th site so far in the last 3 years. And we'll keep doing it until, as long as we have support. But the series was really out of love for my mother, who raised me as a single mom and who fostered these relationships with aunties and made sure that I had kitchen tables to sit around and hear these stories. Even though she was just a sunburned mixed race girl from Los Angeles that had no native blood whatsoever. But go hug your mother. There's never harm in doing that. So at this point, I guess we'll shift over into the next phase of this.
We'll give Andre a big round of applause right now while we get set up.
Right or left?
Oh, either way.
Dealer's choice. Sure.
Thanks for that. That was really great, Andre.
Thank you.
So my name's Keola Kinghorn, and I'm studying writing and rhetoric with an emphasis on decolonial theory. I'm a professional theater reviewer, and I study Indigenous methodologies, which I'm just grateful to have this conversation with Andre today. So I wanted to start with, how do you navigate the challenge of ensuring oral histories remain authentic, or how do playwrights in general do that while ensuring that they stay authentic while adapting them for a broader non-Indigenous audience?
Yes. So there's a lot to be said about getting permission, particularly within traditional spheres. And this is one of the reasons I tend to veer towards more contemporary stories, stories about today and that sort of thing, because I am scared to death about malappropriation, that some AI will troll the web and grab some of the content that I'm supporting out there in the world and put it forward in a context or a box or a remix or something like that that doesn't serve the people that the story originates from. Usually when I end up with a traditional story being put forward, there's been, in the background leading up to that event, a process where you obtain blessings from elders and culture bearers. With traditional stories, there has to be reflection, I think, about what the purpose of the story is, who it's for, and if it's an appropriate place to manifest. And which isn't to say that you can't find these stories, you just have to be in the right room at the right time. And more often than not, people that I talk to interculturally are surprised that how welcoming, how open Indigenous rooms, as it were, stories, places where these stories are heard are, and how welcoming. How people are stunned that powwows are free and open for everyone. You just have to remember to stand during the grand entry, and if there's a blessing, or if there an eagle feather falls on the ground, that everything has to stop because there's meaning around that. But this is sort of your job as people in the world. I mean, like I said in my speech, and I'll go on, and this is why you only get through 2 questions. Culture is the lens, because we bring our cultures with us. You have the big C culture, how you were raised, your religion, your people, the people who claim you. And that defines who you are. But you also have small C cultures. Do you knit? Do you blog? Are you a writer? Are you an academic? Do you weld? Do you garden? Do you love cats or dogs? Those are small C cultures, and those are opportunities to connect with your fellow man. You have a big C culture and you have a small C culture, and there is a negotiation, an invisible negotiation in every room that you go into about what sense of time is. Because if you've ever walked into a room with a timing that is not your valued culture, it can be quite uncomfortable. It takes me a few days to get used to New York fast, for instance. And I have to pump the brakes every time I go back home to the reservation because time unfolds slower. Anyways, sorry.
No, you're great. I mean, when I was researching the aunties and your process, I was really impressed that you go out before and you get to know a place before you start working with
Gravity
the
is taking my...
Your
my-
mic is falling.
There we go.
So what are some of the places you take the aunties to? I know Hawaii was one of them, right? Indigenous population.
We've been... I'm based in Washington State, so a lot of the funding I get is in Washington State. So we've been to Washington more than most places. So we've been Bellingham, which is Lomi territory, Seattle, which is Duwamish and Muckleshoot territory, and down in my hometown in Olympia in Squaxin Island, Nisqually territory. But we also were invited to Santa Fe last year in January, which is Pueblo, St. Paul, Minneapolis, which is Dakota, Lakota. We were going to do Los Angeles, which is a complex milieu of tribes. That Tong was, oh God. I have to have a map sometimes.
It's okay. You're okay.
But the place caught fire, and so we had to reschedule. Next year, we have invitations to go to the DC area, the National Museum, the North American Institute, American Indian, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution, invited us out. Walla Walla, we're going to be doing Yakima in a month and a half. But we also actually have an invitation to go to 3 islands in Hawaii to talk with, but these are all heavy lift projects. And with a project that is this dependent upon getting blessings and building relationships, it really, like every project life cycle is about 3 years. Wow. Because in about another year, hopefully we'll have the half-hour documentary from this site to share with the world. Funding being what it is right now. It might take a little bit more time than that because, you know, there have been hiccups in the funding world recently. But we're figuring it out. Yeah. So long-term commitments. The documentary shorts will live with the tribal cultural centers or museums, for the most part, of the tribes of the storytellers. It needs to be, we need to make sure that they were free and available to those communities. I'm currently trying to, the goal is, and my hope is that this project will eventually manifest as an app where you can drop a pin in a territory and that sort of thing, and you can find a story from a person of the land there. But that is another financial hurdle. I'm always writing grants. If there's one skill that I use so much nowadays is writing grants. And
Sounds
which
like
is
a
just
lot.
another type of storytelling, really.
Right.
Anyways.
Another question I had, because my research includes this archival element to Indigenous storytelling because of the erasure of Indigenous people. So what role does storytelling play in preserving Indigenous language and cultural identity, and why is performance particularly valuable and important in this?
Yeah, I mean, our young people need to see folk who look like them on stage, on the screen, that sort of thing. Cultural representation isn't just a hopeful thing for our young people in our communities. It's a joyful thing. This is why we travel as people, is to step outside ourselves, step outside of our comfort zones, understand things. And travel will open your world. But you don't even have to travel because there are so many cultures everywhere you go. You just don't realize it necessarily. With regards to, like, archiving is a very interesting question, and I'm perhaps less educated about this. I've talked with many people, and it is a hard problem to solve, to make things available and hopefully free for people, especially young people, but to again guard against malappropriation. Again, I'm deeply alarmed by, artificial intelligence being trained against models without their permission, like content without their permission. And I've actually been invited to, that's my pen, Microsoft keeps inviting me to like these nonprofit artificial intelligence sort of forums where like they're looking to train proprietary AI against cultural models and things like that. But I used to work for Microsoft. It's a monstrously huge company. And there's some great and ethical people there, but there are also people who just, want to, hit done at the end of the day and go and watch the game and that sort of thing. And so, not to be precious about it, but a lot of this, the work that me and my company do, a lot of the work that my colleagues do is important to us. Yeah. And we were entrusted with the task of keeping it safe. Yeah. And to create cultural safety for the people who shared it with us. And I still am sometimes overwhelmed by the elders, the culture bearers that express trust in me. Because this is trust that is not easily earned. So.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think you're doing a great job,
For this last little bit, we're going to turn it back over to the students.
5 minutes. Quick questions.
Yeah, if any of you have any questions, please raise your hand and I will bring you a mic.
You talked a lot about, like, throughout your presentation, sort of independent theaters and independence, like, places in which art happens and occurs. Have there been any interesting spots in Utah that you would recommend? And also, broadly, what do you think the importance of independent filmmaking and independent theater is?
My partners in Utah, gosh, Orem Library has actually brought out several of my touring music groups, actually, over the years, which is fascinating. Utah Presents has, of course, is doing this 3-year project with me. I've only been running this organization for 9 years. For context, in the first year, I run, there's sort of like 4 things that we do. We run tours. So we find tour-ready work and sort of like package it up and go to booking conferences. If you've ever wondered how work gets out there into the world, how that ends up at Utah Presents or, stadiums or venues and that sort of thing, there are conferences. And artists and booking agents all get together with venue programmers and we horse trade. And be like, what does your season look like and stuff like that. And the best manifestation of that, ends up being a dialogue in service to the community that the venue resides in. And hopefully the venue, and Utah Presents is doing wonderful at this, recognizes the full diversity of communities that are around them and hope to provide connective tissue. Because that's, I think, what the arts are best at doing, is sharing new ideas and that sort of thing. But we also do take new ideas and take them through the concept and creation process and mount them on stage. Then we send them on tour. We do education. I do consulting sometimes too. We're pretty small, actually. The Cache Valley Center for the Arts is also one of our longer-term partners up in Logan, and that's who we're partnering with for the second show of this. It's been slow going, to be quite honest. I've been talking with a lot of venues across the country for years and years and years, and they haven't committed to partnering to bring content out. It's frequently a hard sell, and we have to be persistent, and we have to be generous with each other, and because I get a non-zero amount of hate mail every year, because the narrative that's been written about Native people in this country is 200 years old, right? And a lot of people really, really feel strongly that American Indian, Native American people are the noble savage, or that we're innocent or spiritual or whatever. And the truth is, we're modern people, right? And our story reflects that. Our story today reflects that. Yes, we have traditions. But I don't know. Did I answer your question? I'll talk at you forever. Anyone else? You have a little bit more time. I can stay after too. I don't really have anything until I teach a scene study class later on. Yes.
Thanks. You said that the census for Native American people, the population, went down, but that's people self-identifying as Native. Do you see that as a bad thing?
So it went up.